Call the meeting to order. Please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Dan Esposito. Esposito, you know.
Roll call, please. Supervisors Esposito and Anita Johnson are excused. Okay. At this time, we'll open the meeting up to citizens' comments. Any citizens wishing to speak? Any citizens wishing to speak? Any citizens wishing to speak? Seeing none, citizens' comments are closed. Announcements of the chair. I'll just bring you up to speed on the joint services meeting this evening. We had Delta Works in and got our timeline. It's going to the committee that's going to oversee it. Tomorrow is their first meeting. They're going to get all the information and the specs of how to judge the bids that came in. We did get 7 bids in, so it was very good. We asked the consultant if he had heard of some of these companies and was satisfied with the bids, and he was. So that is moving forward, and I will keep you informed as we continue with that project. I have no other announcements. Supervisors' reports. Supervisor Hallman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just 2 items from Human Services. First, just a reminder that the Human Services budget meeting is going to be tomorrow at 5:30 at the Job Center. Tomorrow, October 16th, 2013. Also, don't forget about the Homeless Veteran and Veterans Benefit Expo on October 26th, which is a Saturday from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. at the Job Center. Just 2 items very quickly from the Wisconsin Counties Association. First, they're hosting a webinar for the Fall Legislative Outlook. That's going to be on Monday, October 21st from 9 to 10 a.m. You can register at the WCA website. If you missed that time slot, those webinars are archived and you can view them at a later time at your leisure. Also, the County Ambassadors Program for WCA, October 23rd. They have released in the email the 3 lobbying items for counties, which include the raising bill, which is Assembly Bill 415 and Senate Bill 328, support for treatment and diversion expansion legislation, in opposition to Senate Bill 308, Assembly Bill 387, unless amended, to fully fund county costs related to bringing 17-year-old first-time nonviolent offenders back to the juvenile justice system. They say they have amendment language already prepared. They say they would also like it if we could bring county staff members to provide additional detail in those meetings. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Supervisor Hallman. Supervisor Dodge.
Yes, I'd like to report on a meeting I had Friday, the sheriff and yourself. And I've been inquiring into the accounts that sheriff has from civil forfeiture funds. Kenosha News reported over the past 5 years there have been deposits of $741,000 and expenditures of $607,000 from that account. There also is an investment account of $25,000 and with a current checkbook balance of $226,000. While this is not taxpayer money, it is government money, and I feel there should be accountability for it. Corporation Counsel Bernie Vash gave us a guide to equitable sharing for state and local law enforcement agencies. I want to share parts of that deal, share parts that deal with handling income, expenditures, and accounting of that money with you. Under Article Roman numeral 9A, it states, and I'll quote, the state or local participating agency must, Sub 6 says, establish an internal procedure to recommend expenditures from the revenue accounts. In many small agencies, the chief of police determines the purpose for which these funds are used. In larger agencies, committees have been formed to make recommendations for expenditures from the federal sharing revenue account. Under sub 9, it goes on to say, obtain approval for expenditures from the governing body, such as the town council or city manager's office, if applicable. 10 says under final approval, issue contracts or purchase orders to formally disperse deposited assets for goods and services, deduct purchase orders and contacts from the account balance. That report also says under Roman numeral 10, what are the reporting and audit requirements? Under A, Federal Equitable Sharing Agreement and Certification Form. It says, as a prerequisite to participating in the Department of Justice Equitable Sharing Program, a state or law enforcement agency must annually submit to AFMLS a signed equitable sharing agreement and certification form. It says see Appendix E, which I have if anybody wants to see it, which lists all the expenditures. The agreement must be signed by the head of the law enforcement agency and a designated official of the governing body. It goes on to define the designated official of the governing body as a governing body is an institution or organization that has budgetary oversight over the law enforcement agency. Friday, we were handed a paper in our meeting, and in part, that also said that the Department of Justice prefers that there is collaboration with the county government as to the use of the funds. I did a little looking around, and I found that in Rock County, which I felt was similar because they have a large city like Janesville. And in Rock County, there's a Diane Michaelis. She's the Rock County Sheriff's Office Financial Manager. She says deposits seized into the county's main, deposits seized funds into the county's main bank account controlled by the treasurer. The funds are recorded on the books in a balance sheet account. In order to spend the funds, the sheriff's office writes a resolution requesting authorization from the county board. Their normal purchasing procedures are followed, and the county processes the payment through the county's checking account. And they apparently do this without compromising their undercover officers or informants. I'm not saying that this is necessarily the best process for us. However, I believe as it is government money, we should have accountability and oversight. I am asking the finance chair to proceed to that end. I hope we can work with our sheriff to improve the way we handle all this money. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Dodge. Supervisor Alverman.
Very briefly, Mr. Chairman, 2 items. One that I've been reporting on for a year and a half is that we did start digging a hole for the 60th Street Communications Tower. Final approval by everyone was given, and we were sitting there waiting with equipment, and it's begun. And then we had our budget approval and discussion last night for highways, parks, facilities, golf, and PDAC portions of that budget. So, thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Alverman. Any other supervisor reports? Seeing none, that portion of the agenda is closed.
Old business, 52 from Planning, Development, Extension, Education, Finance, Administration, and Public Work Facilities Committees, a resolution to provide funding for the cost of acquiring properties in the Fox River floodplain. Brunig, yes. Decker, yes. Underhill, yes. Dodge, yes. Galitsky, yes. Rose, yes. Ron Frederick, yes. O'Day, yes. Grady, yes. Colmeyer, yes. Kubicki, yes. Molinaro, yes.
Supervisor Brunig.
Move Resolution 52.
It's been moved by Supervisor Brunig, seconded by Supervisor Alverman to move item 52. Any discussion on that item, Supervisor Brunig?
No.
Okay.
This resolution was put together to combine several funds so that the Land Development Department can acquire different properties in the floodplain as they become available through either tax rolls or foreclosures. And this is to clear out some of the additional properties that are over on the Fox River. This was approved in all committees. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Bruning. Seeing no more lights, this is a budget modification. We will need a roll call and 2/3 vote.
Gonna vote no on that one.
You need to vote. Item 52 passes 21 to nothing.
New business, Resolution 56 from Judiciary and Law Committee, a resolution to approve the appointment of Lieutenant Gil Ben to the position of Director of the Division of Emergency Management. Esposito, yes. Ron Johnson, yes. Boyd Frederick, yes. Arrington excused. Anita Johnson, yes. And Montemiro, yes. Noble, yes.
Supervisor Boyd Frederick.
Move Resolution 56.
Resolution 56 has been moved by Supervisor Boyd Frederick, seconded by Supervisor Montemiro. Supervisor Frederick.
The county executive has appointed Lieutenant Gil Ben to the position of Emergency Manager Director. He has been with the department since 1987, and since January of 2003, he has been the assistant to the, and the reason it's open is because the person who is presently in the position has retired.
Thank you, Supervisor Frederick. Seeing no lights, all those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? That passes.
Resolution 57 from Judiciary and Law and Finance Administration Committees regarding request to sell Sheriff's Department 1995 Mako boat and trailer and use the proceeds to purchase equipment for a 2003 Defender safe boat. Esposito, yes. Ron Johnson, yes. Boyd Frederick, yes. Arrington, yes. Anita Johnson, yes. Montemiro, yes. Noble, yes. Rose, yes. Ron Frederick, yes. O'Day, yes. Grady, yes. Colmeyer, yes. Kubicki, yes. Molinaro, yes.
Supervisor Boyd Frederick.
Move Resolution 57.
Resolution 57 has been moved by Supervisor Boyd Frederick, seconded by Supervisor Noble. Supervisor Boyd Frederick.
Yes, this is to purchase 2 new motors totaling the amount of $27,900 for a boat that was obtained by the Sheriff's Department for free. This boat originally was a Coast Guard boat, and it now enables them to go out further into Lake Michigan.
Thank you, Supervisor Frederick. Supervisor Underhill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to amend this resolution to put a provision in there to buy the motors from someplace in one of our companies in Wisconsin, either Mercury or Evinrude. I just don't want to see them buying a Japanese-made motor.
There's a motion, an amendment to this motion on the floor by Supervisor Underhill, seconded by Supervisor Molinaro. Supervisor Underhill, any more comments?
Basically, on the fifth whereas, just put Wisconsin-made. Under new motors, Wisconsin-made, and other equipment, graphics, and to make the saleable for law enforcement needs.
Okay, anything else?
Nope.
On the amendment, Supervisor Molinaro.
Just a question. I hadn't thought of it. I seconded the amendment. I think it's a good practice, and I'll get to a point on that in a minute, but I'd like to ask the representative from the Sheriff's Department, if I could, through the chair, I think I asked this at the Finance Committee, and the answer was no, it hadn't been, but has a RFP been put out yet on these motors?
Yes. Come up to the mic, please. Thank you.
I'm Captain Apker from the Sheriff's Department. No, an RFP has not. It's been sent over for purchasing, but it was sent over with a sole source to Honda because the boat is already outfitted for Honda motors. It came from the Coast Guard that way. It has Honda equipment on it. It's cabled for Honda, and I know a question came up about our current boat when we put the new motors on this year. It cost about $5,000 to cable that because we went from Evinrude motors to Mercury motors. So in order to save some money and go along with what the boat was designed for, we did requested a sole source from purchasing for Honda Motors. That's why we did Honda Motors.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, have you ever arrested anyone for drugs out on the lake?
Not that I'm aware of.
Never found drugs on any boat on the water.
Not that I'm aware of. We could have. I'm just not aware of it.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm going to work on the assumption that you have. So I think I know where there might be $250,000 you could grab $5,000 from to recable the boat. Here's why I think it's a good idea. One of the most recent, probably most significant success stories of cooperation between industry and labor is Mercury Marine up in Fond du Lac. And not only did all parties make a concession to keep that company in the state of Wisconsin, they have expanded significantly and hired at a phenomenal pace the last several years. So, again, I hadn't even thought of this until the motion was made. I had no intention of bringing this issue up. I think it's a solid amendment, and I think it makes a great deal of sense. So I support it and urge the rest of the board to support it.
Mr.
Thanks,
Chairman?
Supervisor. Who said that?
Captain Apter.
Go ahead.
Just to clarify, the resolution was to sell the Mako. It wasn't to purchase the new motors. The new motors are being purchased with drug forfeiture money. This resolution is to sell the Mako.
And use the proceeds to purchase.
Floor. That was not made clear unless I dozed off at Finance Committee that this was being purchased with drug forfeiture money. I was told it was in the budget because I asked specifically about the accusations that have come out of your department that they're buying, that you're swapping out firearms purchases for motors, which you cleared up was not accurate, and I take that at face value. But in no time was I told it was drug forfeiture money. I was shown in the budget where it was budgeted, I thought.
The motors for this year, the purchased motors were budgeted for this year on the Mako. We purchased the boat with drug forfeiture money for a little over $12,000. We submitted a purchase order to purchasing for the purchase of 2 outboard motors with drug forfeiture money. This resolution before the board is for the sale of the Mako and to use that money that was on the sale of the Mako to put back in the drug unit for the money that was taken out, or that will be taken out.
But then you'll have to take it out again, if I may, Mr. Chairman, to purchase what you believe to be potentially Honda motors at this point in time. Because you don't have these Honda motors yet.
No, that purchase request is over at purchasing to do that.
But that money will come out of the drug forfeiture money, is that right?
That's correct.
All right. I continue to support the amendment, and I believe if we add that amendment to the sale of these motors, it answers all questions involved. We recognize that the resolution before us tonight is for the sale of the motors only, but we'll put the language in it that will increase that not only from the sale of the motors, but to, well, you know what, I'll tell you what. We can clear this up real simply. We'll refer this back to committee, and I so move. We'll straighten it out there.
Okay, there's a motion to send this back to Judiciary and Law.
It's October. I don't think we'll need these motors until at least May.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman, the Finance Committee and Judiciary and Law.
Are those the two it went to? Is that what your motion is?
Both
Okay.
committees, yes.
Okay. Then the motion on the, do we need to deal with the first?
Well, you know what? Where do you want it, finance or both?
First Amendment. Before we take on
Again.
Supervisor Underhill, you're the first maker of the First Amendment. Would you yield to that amendment to send it back to the two committees? Captain Apker?
Always evasive.
Why did we purchase these two motors for $27,900 earlier in the year, and now we're replacing them again? I mean, this just doesn't make good sense. I mean, seriously. Why did we put new motors on a 1995 boat that I'm sure someone must have checked it out and says, this ain't a good idea? Did anybody do that?
Yes, the boat is old, but the motors on it were even older, and they just wouldn't continue to run. We kept on having to pull it out of the water for repairs. New motors were on the 5-year plan to put on the boat for 5 years at least, and they kept getting put off. Or I know it got put off at least once. So finally this year we got the new motors. We were going to be happy with that. The motors are perfect for the boat. The boat is aged, but would still suffice. It just happened that this Coast Guard boat, which is a $200,000 boat when it's new, it's 10 years old, but it's an aluminum boat compared to a fiberglass boat. It will serve the Sheriff's Department for probably 20 years, the way it is. The fiberglass boat, I can tell you, most likely will not. But we wouldn't even be here tonight if it wasn't for this opportunity that came about with the 1033 program, that the Coast Guard repurposed this boat and took it out of commission and made it available to law enforcement. So the sheriff decided to purchase the boat for $12,000. It really came to $11,500 plus their fees, a little over $12,000. That was drug forfeiture money. The boat is purchased already. We have the boat. Before we purchased the boat, our intent was to put the new motors that we just got this year on the boat. But we learned that, and this was before we bought the boat, so we had it on a 30-day trial period. During that 30-day trial period, we brought it to the Coast Guard station, had them look it over. They said the boat's in perfect condition. But the motors will not work on the boat because they require a 30-inch shaft, and the new motors that we got for the Mako are only 25-inch shafts. Now, they're $25,000 motors, and the option was to buy a conversion kit to put a 5-inch extension on the shafts to make them work. That would void the warranty. And then we talked with the owner, or the manufacturer of this boat, and they said it's the recommended motors for it are the Hondas. And if the boat is set up, all the gauges and everything are Honda gauges, all the cabling are for Hondas, and it's rated for 225s, and our current motors are 200s. So the sheriff decided to put two new motors on that boat and sell the Mako, if we can, and that's what the resolution is for, as a whole boat with motors on it. Instead of taking the motors off, retrofitting the motors, put the motors that weren't designed for this boat on that boat, and then try to sell the Mako without motors on it. So our hope was to get a little more. We got the Mako for free. There's no cost. There was no cost to the county for the Mako. So basically what we have in that boat is about $30,000 for the two new motors and the retrofit to get those motors to work on that boat. And what we have the opportunity for is to get a $200,000 boat, basically for the $12,000 that it costs for the boat, probably a little over $30,000 for two new Hondas, minus what we'll get for the Mako, which we hope to be about $30,000 or a little more. And of that money that we spend, even though it comes out of the drug unit, we will be able to get back a portion of that over a 5-year period from the DNR, probably close to somewhere between 60 and 70%, depending on a lot of variables. So it's basically a deal that was too good to pass up. I mean, this boat is in perfect condition. It's aluminum, and it'll last the Sheriff's Department forever. It'll outlast the two new motors that we get.
Thank you. At this point, we have a motion on the floor to refer it back to the two committees that it came out of. That takes precedent over your motion, so we will vote on that. All those in favor of sending it back to the committees? Pardon me?
Who seconded, Mark?
I think Supervisor Montemuro seconded it, if I heard correctly.
Point of order. It's
Point of order,
debatable.
Supervisor
It's debatable, I'm trying to say,
Okay?
to send it back to committee on.
You could certainly talk about sending it back to committee. You're on.
Okay, thank you. Well, I originally pressed my button to clear up a few things, but now Captain Hapter has done that. It clearly says in here that it was said in the presentation that we got it for free, and we didn't. It clearly says we got it for $11,500 using drug unit federal equity share fund, drug money. So I think he explained it now. He's explained it as it was explained to the Judiciary and Law Committee. I think everybody on the Judiciary and Law Committee should be perfectly clear. There's nothing new that we're going to find out about this if it's sent back to committee. I say we don't send it back to committee. We vote it up or down, and I'm going to vote for it and go on to the next item on the agenda.
Thank you, Supervisor Noble. Supervisor Montemuro.
I agree with Supervisor Noble that those of us on the committee agreed, but now the question is, if we have to buy new motors, would they still be Mercury motors when the boat is Honda? So that's the only change. So unless Underhill's motion doesn't matter, then we don't need to get it back to the committee to discuss. So that's the only reason I wanted it back to the committee, to find out whether or not Mercury motors are possible, or if it has to be Honda. If it has to be Honda, then I understand we don't need it back to the committee.
And I think the captain answered that question, right, for you?
There's no Mercury motor at all that fits?
He said that it's all Honda, and that's what would fit it, so.
All right.
Am I correct, Captain?
Well,
Just to clear up the question here.
I'm not saying that the Mercury motors can't go on there. I'm just saying that it was designed for Hondas. That's the manufacturer recommendation, and that's why we put a sole source on that, sole source request on it.
Thank you. Supervisor Skalitsky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The one question I still have is, I understand, and the captain cleared it up here, is it says, and use the proceeds to purchase equipment for 2003. Yet, as the captain just had explained to us, it was for the sale of the Mako. But then in the resolution, at least the abbreviation here, it talks about proceeds. So could somebody from the committee please clarify so that I get a better understanding? Are we approving just the sale of the Mako with the motors? Or are we approving the sale of the Mako with the motors and then also the proceeds to be used elsewhere? Because that's the way it reads right now.
From what I understand, it's for the sale of the Mako. Captain.
It's for the sale of the Mako and the proceeds to go back into the drug unit. Because the drug unit, we use drug unit money to buy the new boat, or the Coast Guard boat, and the motors that we put the purchase order in.
And I appreciate that part. And so I would ask Corp Counsel, does it need to read such that, this resolution, that the proceeds will go back into the drug use fund to be used again, or are we approving the purchase of new motors? Because the way it reads is the purchase of equipment. That's awfully general.
Supervisor Skalitsky, the way it's written, and I think the captain tried to sum it up a couple times, but I'll just read it, and in my interpretation of this language, it would cover purchasing the motors and other equipment needed to outfit the 2003 Defender Safe boat. But this is how it reads. Now therefore be it resolved, the County Board of Supervisors approves that the Mako boat trailer be put up for sale to the public or to another municipality, or to send to an auction, and the proceeds of the sale be earmarked for purchasing the equipment, etc., to upfit the 2003 Defender Safe boat. So that language is sufficient to, it doesn't necessarily say that it goes back to the drug unit, but it does say that that's what the money of the sale of the Mako will be used for.
Does it need that wording in it? From your opinion, does it need
For the
that wording
motors?
that the funds will go back to the drug unit to be then used for purchase of additional equipment? And then would that purchase need to be reapproved by the board? Because it's an expenditure and it's not a couple $1,000.
I don't think it's absolutely necessary that it be included in here, but there'd be nothing wrong with amending it to put it in there.
Okay, thank you. And I appreciate the captain's position on Hondas. That boat can be retrofitted, certainly with gauges and wiring. Is it a little bit of a hassle? Yeah, but I'd rather see Wisconsin-made products put on this boat, whether they're Mercury or Evinrude, than it would be for Honda. In addition, whether you want a 4-stroke or a 2-stroke, that's to be debated. So I would support Supervisor Underhill's amendment to this, provided it says we're selling the boat.
Not on that amendment, right?
Okay.
We're sending it back to the committee.
Okay, is that where we're at then? Thank you.
Supervisor Rose.
I'm going to urge the board to send it back to committee. I think that the discussion here, the one issue raised about Wisconsin products, and the second issue raised by Supervisor Slitsky, that what does the resolution mean, indicates, I think, to all of us that the resolution is unclear, and the clarity of it needs to be refined. So I think the safer practice here is to send it back so that we all understand precisely what we're doing. It doesn't say in the resolution, for example, that the money is to go back to the drug unit. It merely says that it is to be used for the safe boat. So where is that language? That's a policy decision we have to make. It's not made in the resolution. It's not authorized in the resolution. These are all good reasons why it should go back to the committees.
Anybody else on that? Supervisor Grady.
Just so we're clear, the motion is to refer back to the two committees, is that correct? Okay.
Correct. Judiciary and Law and Finance. Anything else, Supervisor Grady? Supervisor Molinaro.
Here's the main reason this needs to go back to committee, and this was, keep in mind, it came through our committee prior to the meeting on Friday that Supervisor Dodge referred to, which I sat in on as well. This goes directly to Supervisor Noble's comments. Keep in mind, purchase 2 boats and what will ultimately be 4 motors, none of which this county board would have any knowledge of if it wasn't for the fact that the Sheriff's Department now wants to sell 2 motors they purchased without authorization or without oversight of the county board. This goes to Supervisor Dodge's point. Supervisor Noble, I think this goes directly in opposition to the point you were making. The only reason this is before us today is because they now want to dispose of property that they bought with the drug enforcement funds. I get it. I'm okay with that. I know the fund is there. I know what it's to be used for, but we added an armored vehicle to the fleet, right? This is what needs to be discussed in committee now as part of this resolution. This came before that meeting on Friday. So they went out and purchased this new boat. We had no idea. Didn't do enough homework to recognize that the motors weren't going to fit, apparently, or determined in the 30-day evaluation that it didn't matter because they would just go back to the drug fund, buy a couple more motors, only to find out now they're kind of hamstrung because they can't dispose of the property they already had without county board approval. Well, they can buy the boat without county board approval. This needs to go back to committee to iron this issue out as part of the bigger picture. Otherwise, we'd have no conversation here. We'd have bought 2 boats and 4 motors. And what we'd have gotten, and the taxpayer would have gotten, was a bill to pay the insurance and the upkeep. Because that they won't pay out of the drug fund. Send it back. Let's talk about it, figure it out. I'm not telling the sheriff I won't give it to him. I supported it in committee. I have a little bit more information tonight that warrants it going back to committee for further discussion, and we'll figure it out. But it can't be this way. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Molinaro. Supervisor Underhill.
Yeah, getting back to the two motors that they purchased last spring.
Well, let's stick with sending it back to committee. I'm not going to have the debate
Okay,
here and then
forget
have
it.
it debated
Never mind.
again and again and again.
Sorry.
All right.
I'll bring that up at committee.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Supervisor Decker.
I'm in favor of sending it back to committee because if there's questions on the board floor, the committee is the place to have the discussion. I would like to recommend, now while I agree with Supervisors Underhill's motion about buying Wisconsin-made products, I would like the committees to get an RFP to get estimates of all different costs, because I don't want to hamstring us as a county board to purchasing Wisconsin-made products if the costs are out of line compared to non-Wisconsin-made products. So I would just like to recommend that. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Decker. Supervisor Ron Frederick.
I agree with Supervisor Decker that if we're going to talk about buying, Wisconsin products, that we ought to know what the cost of buying those Wisconsin products is above using the Honda, which the boat is designed for, because it's going to require a lot of other stuff, I would imagine. So hopefully they can have that information for us too.
Thank you, Supervisor Ron Frederick. Seeing no more lights? Roll call, and this motion is to send it back to the two committees. That passes 18-3, and this item will go back to the two committees that we had stated.
Resolution 58 from Judiciary and Law and Finance Administration Committees, a request to sell, trade, auction the Sheriff's Department's two 2003 Harley motorcycles and use the proceeds to purchase snowmobiles, utility terrain vehicle. Esposito, yes. Ron Johnson, yes. Boyd Frederick, yes. Arrington excused. Anita Johnson, yes. Montemiro, yes. Noble, yes. Rose, yes. Ron Frederick, yes. O'Day, yes. Grady, yes. Colmeyer, yes. Kubicki, yes. Molinaro, yes.
Supervisor Boyd Frederick.
Move Resolution 58.
Resolution 58's been moved by Supervisor Boyd Frederick, seconded by Supervisor Ron Johnson. Supervisor Boyd Frederick.
At the present time, the Sheriff's Department owns two Harley motorcycles purchased in 2003. The estimated value of them is about $14,000. The sheriff requests to basically take the two Harley motorcycles and proceed to purchase snowmobiles or all-terrain vehicles with the purchase. Basically, the two to sell the motorcycles and get the other, the all-terrain or the snowmobile will basically even out.
Thank you, Supervisor Frederick. Supervisor Underhill.
Yeah, I just want to say it's a sad day to see our motorcycle units go away. I've always been in favor of the motorcycle units. Obviously, I ride myself, so it's just a sad day that we can't keep this tradition going. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Underhill. Supervisor Decker.
Through the chair to Captain Epker, explanation why we are doing away with the motorcycles and purchasing snowmobiles, if you have one.
A few years back, Deputy Bordeaux, who's now a sergeant, was hit from behind on Highway C and severely injured, almost to the point where he couldn't come back to work. He is back to work now, but he still suffers from that injury. The sheriff decided, basically at that time, that we weren't going to put motorcycles back out on active patrol. So in the last few years, they've just been used for parades and funerals, and the bottom line is we're losing our drivers. One retired, another one, sorry to say, he doesn't fit in his uniform anymore, but we're just not utilizing them anymore. Instead of sitting down in the basement just collecting dust, they're still in good working order. They still run well. the sheriff thought that they would be better utilized, or it would be better utilized if we traded them in for something that we can use. The snowmobiles are something that historically we've been given snowmobiles to use every season by local dealers, but last year they could only afford to give us one. We don't send single snowmobiles out on snowmobile patrols, and we were lucky enough to find another dealer to give us one for the year, so we did have 2 snowmobiles. The sheriff would like to get 2 snowmobiles, but it doesn't look like we're going to be able to with the money that we're going to have for the trade-in for the 2. So we'd at least like to get one, and then hopefully talk one of the 2 dealers into giving us another one for the season.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Supervisor Decker. Seeing no more lights, this is a budget modification, so we'll take a roll call. That passes 20-1.
Resolution 59 from Public Works, Facility, and Finance Administration Committees, a resolution to buy land at 961 Green Bay Road, which borders Petrifying Springs Park. Elverman, yes. Noble, yes. Dodge, yes. Nudo, yes. Galitsky, yes. Rose, yes. Ron Frederick, yes. O'Day, yes. Grady, yes. Colmeyer, yes. Kubicki, yes. Molinaro, yes.
Supervisor Alverman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move Resolution 59.
Resolution 59 has been moved by Supervisor Alverman, seconded by Supervisor Skalitsky. Supervisor Alverman.
Yes, Mr. Chairman and supervisors, the committee has come before you probably 3 times now in recent months on obtaining properties that are adjacent, important areas to the county. This property came to our attention, and naturally, since it is one of 2 that are still bordering the Petrifying Springs Park, which would give us total natural control of that squared off piece of property. There's other reasons, naturally, to work on some trails that we have nearby this residence. But the control of the property, especially that main corner, a property that hasn't been up for sale or has been owned by the same family for, I think, approximately 60 years. As you read the resolution, you'll see in some very clear wording, if this property is sold, and it is being sold right now at a very low price, well below assessment, someone could build a home there that we could have for, the next 60 years. So the county sees an advantage to owning that property. One is to eventually square off, own to the corners, have control of where our trails are, have control of who has access to the county park. That has been existent since 1927. So the price, the timing is right, and we're asking for your approval for the full amount. I realize that there's an acquisition price and there's a demolition price. I'm going to explain. I did it last evening on some questions, so before the questions are asked, I'm going to give that information. When you acquire a piece of property, naturally you do not want to leave the shell sitting there. That leads to possibly a vandalism, all kind of things that can happen, and also the looks of the property. We want to return this to a pristine, park-like look. If we do demolish the property, there was a question last evening, well, why do we have to abandon a well? Well, the DNR, that's a requirement. You have to abandon a well. You have to also abandon the septic system. That has to be caved and filled in. So it's not just knocking down a building and planting some grass. So that's why there's the added cost in the budget. And if we are going to do this, we really ask that we do it properly and have it done for generations to come. So I would ask for your approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Alverman. Seeing no lights, all those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Resolution 59 passes.
Resolution 60 from Planning, Development, Extension Education Committee regarding comprehensive plan amendment. Planning, Development, Extension Education Committee sponsor requests approval of draft annual report, a multi-jurisdictional comprehensive plan for Kenosha County 2035, 2012, 2013 annual report. Brunig, yes. Decker, yes. Underhill, yes. Dodge, yes. Skalitsky, yes.
Supervisor Bruning.
Move Resolution 60.
Resolution 60 has been moved by Supervisor Bruning, seconded by Supervisor Decker. Supervisor Bruning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This resolution would approve the annual report, a multi-jurisdictional comprehensive plan for Kenosha County 2035. This is the 2012-2013 annual report. The Kenosha County Multi-Jurisdictional Advisory Committee reviewed, recommended, and approved the annual report at the meeting of October 9th, 2013. And the committee approved this. We recommend approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Bruning. Seeing no lights, all those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Resolution 60 passes.
Communication from Andy M. Bueller regarding future items scheduled before the Planning, Development, and Extension Education Committee.
We'll receive and file that communication.
Claims, summons, and complaints. Gregory G. Whiteside, personal injury. Do you want me to read them all at once?
Yes, please.
Gerald Papar, personal injury. Justin Charles Mass Sr., civil rights complaint. Justin Charles Mass Sr., civil rights complaint. Lillian Chilius, deprivation of federal constitutional rights. Tamara Escobar, wrongful death.
Those complaints will be referred to the Corporation Council.
Approval of the October 1st, 2013 minutes by Supervisor Skalitsky.
Supervisor Skalitsky.
Move to approve the minutes as written.
Supervisor Skalitsky has moved approval of the minutes of October 1, seconded by Supervisor Decker. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Those minutes are approved.
Supervisor Hallman, Healthcare Town Hall follow-up.
Supervisor Hallman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to follow up on the town hall that was had last Tuesday on the Affordable Care Act. It actually had 80 attendees. Some folks came from as far away as Burlington. We had 2 speakers and 6 panelists, the 2 speakers being Citizen Action and UW Population Health, the panelists being Molina Healthcare, Common Ground Healthcare Cooperative, Aurora Hospital System, the Kenosha Community Health Center, Trotter Insurance, and David Insurance. The panelists actually spent an hour and 45 minutes answering questions from citizens, so the bulk of the time was dedicated to that. Questions ranged everything from how does this affect my Medicare to can I keep my insurance to will my premiums go down? There were a lot of questions about how the healthcare marketplace operated, and that seemed to be the main point of confusion and contention and the ability of folks to understand how they could choose a plan. Moving forward, there may be, and there's still some conversation about this as a possibility, just an informative town hall on the West End, which would be a smaller version of what was done last week. To a lesser degree, there might be another one in the city of Kenosha. I'm not necessarily sure of that. But one of the things I did learn from that as I reflected from last week is that healthcare is an incredibly personal issue. And we had a number of residents who said, well, I'm here for my son, I'm here for my daughter. They work X amount of hours, they don't necessarily have health care. And I started to think about the demographic that's so talked about as the, invincibles, as to not needing 18 to 35. And had to ask the question, so what is the healthcare issue that makes it personal for that demographic of folks, which essentially is me? And I thought about the thing that hasn't been talked about, that we've actually had a lot of conversation about, and that's mental health. We have a lot of young adults, young people suffering from clinical depression, bipolar disorder, anxiety, some on medication, some not, some in need of therapy. And there's been very little talk regarding how the Affordable Care Act is going to provide mental health services to those folks, what that will look like. In fact, the administrative rules for that really haven't even been written yet. And there have been some court battles between major insurers as to whether or not they'll cover certain kinds of psychiatric therapy and so forth. So it's an area that's actually under development, and it's an area that is very crucial that we have to have some conversation about. So one of the things that I did last week is I put out a query to a group of young electeds to say, hey, this is something that we really need to take the lead on. We need to investigate how we can have this conversation, what organizations are out there that are knowledgeable about this, maybe even get a jump on Health and Human Services as far as what it is that they're thinking about in terms of writing out how the Affordable Care Act will be executed with regard to mental health. I've not yet heard back from anybody, but I'm going to continue to be diligent on that because it is a very, very major thing. If you have a loved one, a niece, a nephew, a son, or a daughter who suffers with some mental health issues, then you understand what it is that I'm saying. So then the second question becomes, once that person or persons are found to partner with to have that conversation, what does it look like? Because it won't look like your typical town hall in a library or in some conference center. So one of the things that it might look like might be a Google Hangout, which essentially is sort of like a video chat that people can subscribe to. It might be as simple as a Facebook message feed that allows people to ask questions, and you have 2 or 3 folks who respond to that. Maybe even Skype, or possibly even it's just a conversation with 2 or 3 folks with some microphones, and ends up being a podcast that somebody can download to their iPhone. So that's the direction that I'm looking at. I'm not quite certain what will come of it, but I will definitely keep you posted. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Holman. It's been moved by Supervisor Decker, seconded by Supervisor Skalitsky to adjourn. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed?